The automatic doors slid open, and Tony Wayne stepped inside his own store, disguised as just another new hire. Denim jacket. Baseball cap. No one looking twice. But what he saw next stopped him cold. A young cashier. She was at the register, forcing a smile through tears, a black eye darkening her face, her arm trapped in a cast. The Undercover CEO froze, because no employee should look this broken. But when he leaned closer, he realized her injuries weren't an accident, and the truth waiting behind those bruises would shatter everything he thought he knew about his own store. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue. Tony Wayne had built an empire with his bare hands, or so the newspapers liked to say. The reality was messier, less glamorous. His fortune wasn't just born from instinct or genius, it was born from hunger. Real hunger. He remembered vividly what it felt like to go to bed with an empty stomach, the way his younger sister had cried softly into a pillow because their mother couldn't afford both heat and dinner. He remembered the shame of wearing second-hand shoes with soles so thin he could feel the cracks in the sidewalk through them. Those memories never left him. They had carved into him a sense of responsibility, a bone-deep promise that if he ever made it out, he would never forget where he came from. And he had made it out. In spectacular fashion. Wayne Mart, his chain of stores, stretched across the country like veins of steel and light. They sold everything from bread and milk to electronics and clothes, catering to millions. It was an empire, yes, but one he had built with the idea that no child should ever go hungry, no family should ever have to choose between groceries and rent. That was his dream, or at least it had been. But lately, the dream had soured. Letters had arrived at headquarters, unsigned, slipped under doors or sent through encrypted emails. They weren't complaints about prices or faulty products. These were stories of cruelty. Managers berating employees until they cried. Workers forced to clock out and keep working off the books. Mothers denied bathroom breaks until they bled through their uniforms. At first, Tony had thought, this can't be happening. Not in my stores. But then came more letters. Dozens. And one that broke him: we are people, not machines. If you care about us, come see for yourself. Because they won't let us tell the truth while they're watching. So here he was, not in a boardroom with leather chairs and glass walls, but in a bustling Wayne Mart in the heart of the city, wearing a denim jacket and a baseball cap that shadowed his face. He had become just another shopper, pushing a squeaky cart with bread and milk inside. Anonymous. Invisible. And that was how he saw her. Amanda writes. She stood at register 5, moving with a mechanical grace that looked practiced, almost rehearsed. Her uniform was neat, clean navy slacks, a tucked-in shirt, but her body told another story. One arm was in a stiff plaster cast, awkwardly propped against the register as she scanned items. A deep purple bruise ringed her left eye, the swelling just faint enough to suggest it had been there for days. But it wasn't the injuries that struck Tony most, it was the tears. Silent. Relentless. Sliding down her cheeks even as she forced out, "Thank you, have a nice day," to customer after customer. It was rare for Tony to feel powerless, but in that moment, staring at the quiet agony of a young woman doing her best to function while visibly broken, something inside him cracked. He had seen struggle before. He had seen pain. But this was different. This was someone suffocating in plain sight, and no one seemed to notice. Or worse, they noticed and didn't care. As Tony placed his items on her belt, he watched her carefully. Her hand trembled when she reached for the loaf of bread. Her voice wavered when she asked if he had a rewards card. Her eyes darted constantly toward the front doors, scanning the glass as though expecting someone, or something, to appear. Carl Denton, the floor manager, chose that moment to stroll by. Stocky, smug, with a permanent smirk that screamed entitlement, Carl glanced at Amanda and sneered. "Hurry it up, Wrights," he barked, his voice loud enough for customers in 3 aisles to hear. "One arm doesn't mean half the speed. You want sympathy, go cry in the break room." The insult landed like a slap. Amanda's face stiffened, her lips pressing into a thin line as she blinked rapidly to hold back fresh tears. The customers in line shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others chuckling cruelly at her expense. Tony's blood boiled beneath his calm exterior. He tightened his fists inside the pockets of his denim jacket, fighting the urge to rip off his disguise and fire Carl on the spot. But no, that would blow his cover too soon. He had come here for answers, and answers required patience. So he said nothing. He let Carl strut away, the man's cologne trailing behind him like arrogance in vapor form. But inside, Tony made a quiet vow: Carl's reign of cruelty would not last much longer. Amanda continued scanning, her cast bumping awkwardly against the counter, each movement stiff with pain. Tony leaned in just enough to lower his voice. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Her hand froze on the scanner. For a moment, her mask cracked. Her eyes filled, her lip trembled, and she looked like she might collapse into the conveyor belt. But then, just as quickly, she forced a brittle smile and shook her head. "Yes. Fine. I'm fine." The lie was obvious. And it gutted him. Tony knew what it was like to lie about pain. He remembered telling teachers he'd just fallen down the stairs, when really he'd skipped meals to make sure his sister ate. He remembered the shame of hiding bruises from bullies because admitting them felt worse. He recognized the survival instinct in Amanda's trembling denial. She wasn't fine. She was drowning. Later that night, in his hotel suite overlooking the city, Tony sat in silence. The denim jacket was draped over the chair, the baseball cap on the table. He stared at the skyline, the twinkling lights of skyscrapers mocking him with their illusion of control. He replayed the day in his mind. Amanda's trembling smile. Carl's cruel words. The way Amanda kept glancing at the glass doors with barely concealed terror. She wasn't just overworked. She wasn't just poorly managed. Something darker clung to her like a shadow. And he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever bruised her eye, whatever broke her arm, wasn't an accident. It was someone. Someone who wanted her afraid. Someone who wanted her silent. And for the first time in years, Tony Wayne, the man who could buy anything, command anything, and conquer anything, felt an ache in his chest he hadn't known in a long time. Compassion. Anger. And a terrifying awareness that this wasn't just about his company anymore. This was about Amanda Wright's. And he silently vowed he would find out who did this to her. The next morning, Tony arrived early at the Wayne Mart store. He wore the same denim jacket and baseball cap, determined to remain invisible. He told himself it was just research, just observation. But the truth was, he couldn't stop thinking about Amanda Wright's. Sleep had come in fragments the night before, shards of restless dreams where he saw Amanda's bruised face behind the register, her trembling hands scanning groceries, her forced smile cracking like glass. He had built a company to give people stability, and yet here she was, suffering in the heart of his empire. And then there was the deeper question that gnawed at him: who hurt her? He didn't believe the injuries were random. He'd seen too much fear in her eyes, too much dread when she glanced at the doors. Someone was behind this. Someone dangerous. That morning, the store was quieter, the aisles still filling with fresh produce, carts lined neatly at the front. Tony picked up a basket and pretended to shop, but his eyes tracked Amanda. She was already at her register, cast still strapped to her arm, bruise fading but visible. Her resilience struck him. Most people would have taken sick leave, but Amanda was here, scanning items with a quiet determination, as if her life depended on it. And maybe it did. The store began to fill. A mother with 2 toddlers. A group of teenagers laughing too loudly. A wealthy woman in designer heels clicking against the tiles, her cart filled with imported cheeses and wine. Tony watched as that woman approached Amanda's line. The woman's nose wrinkled when she saw Amanda's cast. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered loudly, rolling her eyes. "This will take forever." Amanda swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "Good morning, ma'am. Did you find everything you needed?" The woman scoffed. "Clearly not if I'm stuck in your line." She gestured toward Amanda's cast with an exaggerated sigh. "What kind of store puts someone like you on the registers? Don't you people know efficiency matters?" Tony's grip on his basket tightened. He wanted to step forward, to tear into the woman for her cruelty, but he forced himself to stay back. This wasn't about his pride, this was about Amanda. He needed to see how she handled it, how the store allowed it. Amanda's lips trembled, but she lowered her head and kept scanning items, her movements even slower now because of her shaking. "Honestly," the woman continued, her voice sharp enough for nearby customers to hear, "people like you should be in the back, not slowing down paying customers. My time is valuable. Amanda's throat worked as if swallowing stones. She whispered, I'm sorry, ma'am. The woman's eyes gleamed with satisfaction at Amanda's apology, and she leaned forward with venom. Pathetic. The word sliced through the air like a knife. Tony couldn't take it anymore. He abandoned his basket, stepping forward just as Amanda's eyes filled. A single tear slipped down her cheek as she tried to hand back the receipt with her good hand. But Amanda's trembling betrayed her. The receipt fluttered to the floor. The woman laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that made Tony's blood run hot. Amanda bent down awkwardly, struggling to pick it up with one good arm. The humiliation was unbearable, written in every line of her body. When she finally stood again, she looked broken. Her cast bumped against the register. Her lips quivered. And then, she snapped. Her voice, barely above a whisper but trembling with pain, cracked the silence. I'm doing the best I can. It wasn't loud. It wasn't defiant. But it was the sound of someone pushed beyond endurance, someone who could no longer carry the weight of cruelty in silence. And in that moment, Amanda Wrights broke down at her register. She covered her face with her good hand, tears streaming freely now as customers whispered and stared. The wealthy woman scoffed again, muttering, unprofessional, before strutting away with her bag of overpriced cheese. Tony's chest ached as he watched Amanda crumble. This was it. This was the moment. He could no longer be just an observer. He moved toward her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You don't deserve this, he said firmly. Not from her, not from anyone. Amanda shook her head, her tears soaking the edges of her name tag. Please, please don't say anything. If you make it worse, I'll. She cut herself off, biting her lip hard enough to draw blood. Tony frowned. Worse? What do you mean? But Amanda said nothing. She just kept shaking her head, scanning the next customer's items through her tears as though nothing had happened. And then, the doors opened. Tony turned instinctively, and that's when he saw him. A man stepped into the store, tall, wiry, his jaw sharp and his eyes like steel. His presence was suffocating, his movements slow but deliberate. He wore a leather jacket and boots that echoed across the tiles as he walked. Amanda saw him too. Her body stiffened instantly. The color drained from her face. Her hand froze over the scanner. She didn't need to say it. Tony knew. This is the one. The man's eyes found Amanda across the store. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just stared, a predator locking onto prey. Amanda's hands began to tremble so violently she nearly dropped the loaf of bread she was holding. The man's lips curved into the faintest smirk. And then, slowly, deliberately, he raised 2 fingers to his temple and mimed a gun, aiming it at her from across the room. Amanda gasped, her body jolting like she'd been struck. Tony's stomach turned to ice. This wasn't a random customer. This wasn't coincidence. This was control. Intimidation. A silent message that Amanda couldn't escape him, not even here. The man, who Tony would soon learn was Derek Cole, Amanda's boyfriend, gave her one last look before strolling casually toward the back of the store, as though nothing had happened. But the damage was done. Amanda was shaking, her tears falling harder now, her voice cracking as she whispered, "No, no," under her breath. Tony felt the shift in the air. This wasn't just a woman with a cruel manager and rude customers. This was a woman living under threat. A woman being hunted in plain sight. And in that moment, Tony knew his life had just changed. He could no longer pretend this was just about corporate policy. He could no longer just take notes and file reports. Amanda Wrights was in danger. And if he didn't act soon, he feared she might not survive. Tony didn't leave the store right away. He lingered in the aisles, pretending to browse paper towels and canned soup, but his mind was nowhere near the shelves. His eyes kept drifting back to Amanda, who was still at Register 5, mechanically scanning items while her tears dried into faint streaks on her cheeks. Every now and then, her eyes flicked toward the back of the store, toward where Derek had disappeared. Each glance was quick, sharp, filled with dread. Like prey checking the shadows for a predator. Tony's chest tightened. He had seen intimidation before, on Wall Street, in boardrooms, even in his own family when greed turned brothers into enemies. But this was darker. This was a kind of control no contract could break, no negotiation could fix. He thought of her whispered words earlier. If you make it worse, I'll. And how she had cut herself off, as if finishing the sentence might summon something unspeakable. Amanda wasn't just afraid of losing her job. She was afraid of losing something far greater. That night, Tony couldn't let it go. He sat in his hotel suite with his laptop open, the city skyline glittering beyond the glass. But he wasn't looking at stock reports or board updates. He was digging. He pulled up the employee database, searching for Amanda Wrights. Her file was thin, almost suspiciously thin. No disciplinary notes, no commendations. Just 5 years of steady employment at the flagship Wainmart. Current address, a rundown apartment complex on the east side of the city. Emergency contact, Derek Cole. Tony's stomach sank at the name. So it was official, Derek wasn't just a random customer. He was tied to Amanda's life, close enough to be her emergency contact. He stared at the screen, his jaw tight. He had seen Derek's eyes, seen the way Amanda froze under his gaze. That wasn't a boyfriend's concern. That was possession. Tony closed the laptop, but sleep didn't come. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Amanda's bruised face burned into his mind. By dawn, he had made a decision. He would go back. Not just to watch, but to act. The following day, Tony returned to the store. He bought a small notebook and a cheap pen from aisle 7 and tucked them into his jacket pocket. If he couldn't reveal who he was yet, he would play the role of the ordinary man who just noticed things. He hovered near Amanda's register again, pretending to shop. Carl, the smug floor manager, was already strutting around, barking orders. Tony caught him snapping at Amanda again, accusing her of slowing down the line when her cast nearly slipped. Amanda muttered an apology, but Tony noticed how her shoulders hunched in on themselves, as if she'd learned that shrinking made her less of a target. Tony's pen scratched across his notebook. Carl Denton, manager, cruelty documented. Then it happened again. Derek returned. This time, he didn't come empty-handed. He strolled through Amanda's line with a basket filled with duct tape, a pack of zip ties, and a box cutter. The items clattered onto the belt with a sound that made Amanda flinch so violently she nearly dropped the scanner. Derek didn't look at her bruises. He didn't ask about her cast. He didn't say a word. He just smiled, slow, deliberate, cruel. Amanda's breathing quickened. Her good hand shook as she scanned the duct tape. Her eyes begged silently, but for what? Help? Mercy? Tony couldn't tell. When Derek's items were bagged, he leaned slightly closer to Amanda and whispered something Tony couldn't hear. Whatever it was made Amanda's eyes glaze with terror. And then, Derek walked away, leaving behind the chill of his threat. Tony's stomach turned. This wasn't subtle intimidation anymore. This was psychological warfare, public, undeniable, intentional. He jotted it all down in his notebook, his pen carving the paper so hard it nearly tore. Duct tape. Zip ties. Box cutter. Message. Control. He had seen enough. That evening, Tony didn't go back to his hotel. He drove across the city to the east side, his car blending into the rusted sedans and broken streetlights. Amanda's address led him to a crumbling apartment building with peeling paint and a flickering neon vacancy sign. The place reeked of hopelessness. Tony didn't go inside. He couldn't risk blowing his cover yet. But he parked across the street, watching. Around 9 p.m., a light flickered on in Amanda's window. He saw a shadow, her silhouette moving carefully, almost nervously. Then another figure appeared behind her. Larger. Male. Derek. Even from across the street, Tony could see the shift. Amanda's body stiffened, her shoulders hunched. Derek's movements were sharp, aggressive, grabbing something from her hand, slamming it on the counter. Tony gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. He forced himself not to rush inside. He couldn't, not yet. Not without knowing more. But when Amanda turned toward the window, for the briefest moment, Tony saw her face illuminated by the streetlight. She was crying. And in her arms, she held a small child. Tony's heart nearly stopped. Amanda wasn't just enduring this for herself. She had children. This wasn't fear for her own life, it was fear for theirs. For the next several nights, Tony returned to that street. He became a ghost in the shadows, watching the flickering lights of Amanda's apartment, piecing together fragments of her life. He saw Derek come and go at odd hours, sometimes storming out, sometimes staying for days. He saw Amanda walk her children, a boy and a girl, no older than 6 and 8, to the bus stop each morning, her cast making the task clumsy but determined. She smiled at them. Always smiled. But Tony could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The way she checked the street corners constantly. The way her hand trembled when she waved goodbye. Every gesture screamed one truth: Amanda Wrights was living in captivity, even outside prison walls. And Tony couldn't just stand by. He began making calls, quietly, carefully. To private investigators. To his most trusted legal advisor. Not as Tony Wayne, the billionaire CEO, but as Dan, the anonymous man gathering information. He wasn't ready to reveal himself yet. But the deeper he dug, the clearer it became: Derek wasn't just abusive. He was dangerous. And Amanda was running out of time. Tony returned to the store the next day, more determined than ever. Amanda stood at her register again, pale and weary, but still there. Still enduring. Still surviving. Tony approached her line, placing a single item on the belt, a small pack of bandages. When Amanda reached for it, he lowered his voice and said softly, "You don't have to go through this alone." Amanda froze, her eyes darting to him, wide and terrified. She shook her head furiously. "You don't understand," she whispered back. "If you try to help, he'll find out. And if he finds out..." Her voice broke. She couldn't finish the sentence. Tony wanted to press, to promise, to swear that he wouldn't let Derek touch her again. But before he could, Carl's voice rang out from behind. "Rights. Less chatting, more scanning. Or maybe you'd rather lose that job altogether." Amanda flinched like she'd been slapped. She shoved the bandages into Tony's bag with shaking hands and whispered, "Please, don't get involved." But Tony knew better. Because the mystery was no longer a mystery. This wasn't just a woman hiding bruises. This was a woman trapped between a corrupt workplace and a violent man. And Tony Wayne, billionaire, undercover, furious, had just decided. He would get involved. No matter the cost. Tony returned to the flagship Wayne Mart with a new determination burning in his chest. For days, he had lingered on the edge of Amanda's life, observing, gathering fragments, piecing together truths. But now the threads were tightening, pulling him closer to the center of the storm. The night before, he had watched from across the street as Amanda put her children to bed. He'd seen the small lamp glowing in their bedroom window, their shadows moving against the curtain as Amanda kissed them goodnight. For a brief moment, there was peace. But then Derek had arrived, slamming the apartment door so hard the walls seemed to shake. Tony had seen Amanda's silhouette flinch in the light. He had clenched the steering wheel in fury, every muscle in his body begging to storm across the street and rip the man away from her. But he hadn't. Not yet. Patience was his only weapon for now. This morning, however, something felt different. He could sense it as soon as he stepped into the store. The air seemed charged, brittle, like glass about to shatter. Amanda was already at her register. She wore a long-sleeve shirt under her uniform today, even though the weather was warm. That alone set off alarms in Tony's mind. Covering injuries. Hiding evidence. He could see the faint bruise peeking from her collarbone when she moved, and his stomach turned. But then came the moment that shifted everything. Tony was pretending to browse magazines when he saw him. Derek. Not lingering in the background this time. Not watching silently. He was standing right in Amanda's line again, this time with no items in his hands. Just standing there. Amanda froze when she saw him. Her hand hovered over the register keys, her lips parting like she'd forgotten how to breathe. Derek leaned forward across the counter, his face inches from hers. His voice was low, but Tony caught fragments. "You think I don't know? Embarrassing me, someone's been watching." Amanda shook her head, stammering. I haven't." Derek's jaw tightened, his smile sharp and terrifying. He lowered his voice even further, but Tony could read Amanda's face as though the words were etched across her skin. He was accusing her. Of talking to someone. Of exposing him. And Tony realized with horror, Derek thought she told him. The hair on Tony's neck rose. His disguise wasn't as invisible as he'd believed. Derek had noticed. Amanda's eyes flickered wide and pleading, toward the aisles, toward Tony's silhouette. A silent warning. Don't. Stay out of this. But Derek followed her gaze. His eyes landed on Tony, and for the first time, predator and protector locked eyes. It was like staring into the face of a storm. Derek's lips curled into a thin, knowing smile. He straightened, collected himself, and finally placed a single item on the belt, a small bouquet of wilted flowers from the store's clearance rack. Amanda's hands shook as she scanned it. Derek whispered something Tony couldn't hear, then brushed his fingers deliberately across Amanda's cast as he took the bouquet. The gesture looked affectionate to outsiders, but Amanda's flinch told the truth. It was a threat. Then Derek walked away. Calm. Controlled. Confident. Tony exhaled, his pulse hammering in his ears. The message was clear: I see you. I know you're watching. And she's the one who will pay for it. That night, Tony called his most trusted advisor, Laura Briggs, a lawyer who had helped him navigate the ugliest corporate battles of his career. But this wasn't about business. Laura, he said, pacing his suite. I need to know how fast I can get emergency custody protection. Restraining orders. Anything for a woman and her children. Hypothetically. Laura's voice sharpened. Tony, what have you gotten yourself into? Not business, he admitted. Something personal. One of my employees, she's in trouble. Real trouble. And I can't just sit here. Laura sighed heavily. Hypothetically, if she were ready to testify, you could move quickly. But if she's afraid? If she won't come forward? You'll have no legal leverage. The courts can't save someone who won't admit they need saving. Tony pressed his hand against the glass window, staring down at the city. Amanda's broken face flashed in his mind. Then I'll make her safe enough to come forward, he said quietly. The following day, Tony returned to the store early. He wanted to see Amanda before Derek showed his face again. She was stocking gum at her register, her eyes red and swollen from crying. He approached slowly, speaking low so no one could hear. You don't deserve this, he said. Amanda, listen to me. Whatever you're afraid of, he doesn't get to own you. Not here. Not anywhere. Amanda's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. She shook her head violently. Stop. Please stop. Her voice trembled as she whispered, You don't understand. If he even thinks someone's helping me, he'll. She stopped herself again, but this time Tony caught the words before they died. He'll hurt the kids. The revelation cut through Tony like a blade. Her silence wasn't just fear for herself, it was sacrifice. She was enduring the torment to shield her children. Before he could respond, Carl appeared, his voice sharp. Rights. Why are you standing around whispering with customers? You think we're paying you to chat? Amanda flinched. Tony turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. Carl smirked at him. Sir, if you don't have business here, move along. She has a job to do. Tony forced himself to swallow the fury rising in his throat. He couldn't reveal who he was yet. Not now. Not with Derek circling and Amanda trembling. But as he walked away, his decision crystallized. He couldn't stay Dan the shopper forever. The disguise had served its purpose, but now it was time to intervene. To use every ounce of power he had, not just as a man, but as the billionaire CEO of Wainmart. And the first person he was going to deal with was Carl. That evening, as Tony prepared to leave the store, he caught sight of Amanda in the parking lot. She was walking quickly, clutching her bag to her chest, her cast making her movements awkward. And then Derek appeared from the shadows. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His voice was low but sharp, cutting through the air. So that's him, huh? That guy hanging around your register? You think I didn't notice? Amanda shook her head desperately. No, Derek, I swear I don't even know him. Derek grabbed her injured arm, squeezing the cast so hard Amanda cried out. Don't lie to me. Tony was out of his car before he knew it, his heart pounding. Let her go. Derek's head snapped up. His eyes met Tony's again. And this time, the smile that spread across his face wasn't amused, it was venomous. Stay out of this, old man, Derek said, his grip tightening. She's mine. Tony's fists clenched at his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to rip Derek away from her. But Amanda's tearful eyes locked on his, silently begging him not to escalate. Derek leaned close to Amanda, whispering something that made her collapse inside. Tony couldn't hear the words, but he saw the devastation on her face. Then Derek shoved her aside, climbing into his truck. Before he drove off, he leaned out the window, his voice low but clear enough for Tony to hear. "Next time you stick your nose in my business, I'll make sure her kids pay for it." The truck roared away, leaving Amanda trembling in the glow of the parking lot lights. Tony stood frozen, rage and horror colliding inside him. This wasn't just a dangerous man. This was a predator who was willing to hurt children. And Tony knew, with absolute certainty, that the time for hiding was almost over. Because Derek had just crossed a line Tony Wayne would never allow to exist. The store felt colder that week. Tony noticed it as soon as he walked in. The fluorescent lights still buzzed overhead, carts still rattled against the floor, and the registers still beeped in their monotonous rhythm, but something in the air had shifted. Amanda wasn't smiling anymore. Not even the faint, practiced smile she used to offer customers. Her eyes were swollen, her lips cracked, and she moved with the sluggishness of someone carrying a mountain of invisible weight. Her cast had fresh scuff marks. Her black eye, once fading, had bloomed into something darker, angrier. A bruise peeked along the edge of her jawline, one that hadn't been there before. Tony's chest tightened. Derek had kept his promise. He hadn't harmed the children, yet. But Amanda's new injuries were proof that Derek's rage had found its outlet. And Tony knew, Amanda had absorbed that violence so her children didn't have to. He stood by the cereal aisle, gripping the edge of the shelf so hard it shook. He had fought corporate raiders, hostile takeovers, even entire governments during negotiations abroad. But never in his life had he felt as powerless as he did watching Amanda Wright smile through cracked lips and scan groceries with shaking hands. For the first time in years, Tony Wayne, the billionaire who could buy and sell empires, felt like nothing more than a helpless bystander. That evening, Amanda disappeared from her register mid-shift. Carl, irritated, announced to anyone who would listen, "She's in the break room again. Crying. Useless." Tony's jaw clenched. He slipped away from the aisles and found his way to the break room door. It was cracked open slightly, and through it, he saw Amanda hunched over a plastic table, her good hand covering her face. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. On the table sat her phone. The screen was lit with a string of messages. "Where are you? Answer me. Don't make me come in there. You think he can protect you? I own you." Tony's throat went dry. Amanda lowered her hand and stared at the phone as though it were a weapon. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she whispered, "Please not tonight. Please." Tony stepped inside quietly. "Amanda." She startled, quickly swiping the phone screen black and wiping her face. You shouldn't be here. I heard you crying." His voice was low, careful. "You don't have to hide it from me." Amanda shook her head violently. "You don't get it. You can't fix this. If he finds out I've even looked at another person for help," she broke off, choking on the words. Tony wanted to reach out, to steady her trembling shoulders, but he forced himself to stay still. "Amanda," he said softly, "he's breaking you. He's already taken so much from you. But you're not his to own." Amanda's laugh was hollow, bitter. "You don't know Derek. He doesn't stop. He'll hurt the kids, he'll take them from me, he'll—" Her voice collapsed, and her head dropped into her hands again. "I've tried to leave. Do you understand? I've tried. And every time I do, it gets worse." The hopelessness in her tone carved into Tony like a knife. This wasn't just fear, this was surrender. Amanda no longer believed escape was possible. And that realization nearly broke him. The breaking point came 2 nights later. Tony was again parked across from Amanda's apartment. The children's room light had just gone out, and Amanda sat near the window, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. Then Derek's truck pulled up. He stormed inside, the door slamming hard enough that Tony could hear it from across the street. Minutes later, shadows flickered violently against the curtains. Derek's tall frame, Amanda's smaller one. Her silhouette stumbled backward. And then Tony heard it. Not clearly, but enough. Amanda's muffled cry, cut short by the sound of something shattering. Tony's body moved on instinct. He was out of his car, across the street, pounding on the building's door. His heart thundered in his ears. But as he reached for the buzzer, the door opened, not to Amanda, but to Derek. Derek stepped out slowly, his knuckles raw, his smile deliberate. "Evening," he said smoothly. His eyes glinted like a predator who had just fed. Tony froze, fury radiating through him. "If you touch her again." Derek leaned in close, his voice dripping with venom. "What are you going to do, huh? Call the cops? Be my guest? You think she'll back you up? She won't. She knows better. She knows her kids are mine to take if she opens her mouth." Tony's fists clenched. Every ounce of him wanted to strike Derek down where he stood. But Derek's words rang with cruel truth. Amanda's silence wasn't loyalty, it was survival. Derek brushed past him, strolling to his truck. "Stay out of my business, old man. You'll only make it worse for her." The engine roared, and then he was gone. Tony stood rooted on the cracked sidewalk, his chest heaving. Across the street, Amanda's silhouette appeared in the window again. She wasn't waving. She wasn't calling for help. She just stood there broken, clutching her side, staring into nothing. And in that moment, Tony felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Defeat. Back in his hotel suite, Tony sank into the armchair and buried his face in his hands. His fortune, his influence, his power, it all felt useless. What was the point of being a billionaire if he couldn't even protect one woman? His mind reeled back through memories of his own childhood. His mother's hushed cries behind closed doors, the sound of his father's booming voice when business stress turned into rage. Tony had sworn he'd never let another woman live through that cycle of fear. And yet here he was, watching it unfold in front of him, powerless to stop it. He poured a glass of whiskey, his hand trembling, but he didn't drink it. He just stared at the amber liquid, his reflection warped in the glass. Amanda's words echoed in his head, "Every time I try to leave, it gets worse." She was right. Without a plan, without protection, without power behind her, leaving Derek was a death sentence. And Tony realized, maybe for the first time in his life, that money alone couldn't solve this. It wasn't about cutting a check. It wasn't about flexing his corporate name. This was about courage. Hers. His. And right now, Amanda didn't have any left. So he would have to carry it for her. The next day, Amanda didn't show up for work. Carl made a snide comment about lazy employees, and probably hungover, but Tony's stomach twisted with dread. He pulled out his phone, dialed Laura Briggs, and spoke with a voice colder than steel. "Laura. It's time. I don't care what it takes, what loopholes you need to use. I want custody protection paperwork drawn up. I want a restraining order drafted. I want Derek Cole's record pulled, every arrest, every charge, every traffic violation. Dig until you hit the core." Laura hesitated. "Tony, are you ready to go public with this? Once you move, your cover is gone. Everyone will know who you are, what you've been doing." Tony's hand tightened on the phone. His eyes burned with fury. "I don't care if the entire world knows. I'm done hiding." He thinks Amanda has no one. He's wrong. She has me. That night, alone in his hotel suite, Tony stood at the window again, watching the city lights blur into the horizon. Amanda was somewhere out there, broken, terrified, possibly planning never to come back. And for the first time in his adult life, Tony Wayne felt tears slip down his face. He whispered into the empty room, "Hold on, Amanda. Just a little longer. I swear to you, I won't let him win." The hotel suite was dark when Tony finally stirred from the armchair he'd collapsed into hours earlier. His whiskey glass still sat untouched on the table, the amber liquid catching the faint light of dawn. His body ached, but his mind burned with a single thought. No more waiting. He stood, shoulders squared, and moved to the desk where his laptop rested. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before he typed one name into the search bar, Derek Cole. The screen flooded with records. Arrests for assault. Charges for battery. A dismissed case of unlawful possession of a firearm. Police reports that had gone nowhere because witnesses refused to testify. Tony's jaw clenched as he read. This wasn't a man misunderstood. This wasn't a man who lost his temper once. Derek Cole was a predator with a documented history of violence, protected only by silence and fear. And Amanda was the latest woman crushed under his weight. But not for long. Tony picked up his phone and dialed Laura Briggs. She answered groggily, but his voice snapped her awake. Laura, I want every resource we have mobilized. Background checks, legal petitions, restraining orders, security detail, everything. I don't care what it costs. I don't care how fast you have to move. I want Amanda Wrights and her children safe within 72 hours. Laura hesitated. Tony, if you go down this road, you'll expose your cover. Everyone will know you've been undercover in your own stores. The media. Let them, Tony interrupted, his voice steely. Let them know I was here. Let them know I saw. I won't be ashamed of protecting her. Silence hung for a moment, then Laura said quietly, I'll start the paperwork. Tony exhaled slowly. For the first time in weeks, the weight on his chest shifted, not gone, but lighter. Meanwhile, Amanda lay in bed at her apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling. Her cast throbbed. Her ribs ached where Derek's shove had met the coffee table. Every breath was pain. But worse than the physical agony was the voice in her head. You can't escape. He'll take the kids. He'll find you anywhere. No one can save you. Her son stirred in the next room, whimpering in his sleep. Amanda closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She wanted to believe there was a way out. But every attempt she'd made before had ended in bruises, threats, and promises of worse. And now, Derek had someone else in his sights, Tony. She had seen the way Derek glared at him in the parking lot, the way he smirked when he squeezed her arm in front of him. Derek was calculating, cruel, but never careless. If he'd chosen Tony as his next target, that meant danger for them all. Amanda's phone buzzed. She flinched, heart hammering, expecting Derek. But when she picked it up, she froze. It wasn't him. It was an unknown number. The message was simple. Amanda, this is Dan. I'm not who I said I was. I need to meet you in private. Please, it's about protecting you and your children. Her heart lurched. Dan? The kind-eyed man who lingered at her register? She bit her lip. Every instinct screamed to delete the message, to erase the evidence before Derek saw it. But another part of her, the part that had once dared to dream of safety, held on to the words. Protecting you and your children. No one had said those words to her in years. That evening, Amanda showed up at work despite the pain. She moved slower than usual, wincing each time she bent. Carl mocked her in front of the staff. Should have stayed home, writes. Can't even keep up with the scanner, let alone customers. What are you, waiting for pity? Tony, lurking by the end cap, nearly lost control. But Amanda, eyes down, whispered only sorry sir, and continued. When the break room emptied that night, Tony slipped inside. Amanda was sitting at the table, clutching her water bottle, her cast resting heavily in her lap. She looked up sharply as he entered. You shouldn't be here. He closed the door. I had to talk to you. Amanda shook her head. No. If Derek finds out. Tony stepped closer, his voice low but steady. Amanda, my name isn't Dan. It's Tony. Tony Wayne. Her brow furrowed. Wayne? As in? Yes. His tone was firm. I'm the CEO of Wayne Mart, the man who owns this store. And I didn't come here by accident. I came because I've been receiving letters about the way employees are treated. I wanted to see it for myself. But what I found was you. And now, protecting you is my priority. Amanda's lips parted, shock flickering across her face. She shook her head. That's not possible. It is, Tony said. And I have resources you don't even know exist. Lawyers. Security. Connections. I can keep you and your children safe, Amanda. But I need you to trust me. Her breath caught. For a moment, hope glimmered in her eyes. But then it died. She shook her head violently. No. You don't understand. If I try to leave him, if I even think about it, he'll take the kids. He's said it 1,000 times. He'll disappear with them, and I'll never see them again. Tony's chest ached. He won't. Not if I act first. I've already put things in motion. Amanda, he's got a criminal record. Restraining orders, custody protections, I can have them ready. But I need you to take the step. I need you to say yes. Amanda's eyes filled with tears. And if you're wrong? If you fail? Then my babies pay the price. And I can't, her voice broke. I can't let that happen. Tony leaned forward, his voice softening. I know you don't believe in freedom anymore. I know you've carried this weight so long it feels like part of you. But listen to me, truth doesn't hide forever. And neither does hope. You've survived this long because you're stronger than you know. And now, you're not alone. Not anymore. Silence filled the room. Amanda stared at him, her chest rising and falling quickly, her cast trembling in her lap. For the first time in years, someone had looked at her and not seen weakness, not seen a victim, but strength. A sob tore from her throat. She covered her face with her hand, tears slipping between her fingers. Tony reached across the table, his hand hovering just above hers, waiting. Slowly, Amanda lowered her hand and placed it over his. Her fingers shook, but they pressed against his palm. Okay, she whispered. Help me. Tony's heart surged. It wasn't a full victory yet, but it was a crack in the chains Derek had wrapped around her. And through that crack, light was beginning to pour. For the first time in weeks, Amanda felt something stirring in her chest. It wasn't safety, not yet. But it was possibility. Derek had told her she was worthless. That no one would believe her. That no one would help her. But here sat Tony Wayne, the man who owned the building she stood in, offering protection, offering action, offering belief. She still feared Derek. She still trembled at the thought of what he might do. But for the first time in years, she wasn't trembling alone. And that tiny ember of courage, once nearly extinguished, flickered back to life. That night, as Tony left the store, he looked up at the sky. The stars were faint against the city's glow, but they were there. He whispered to himself, tomorrow. Tomorrow it begins. Because tomorrow, he would tear down Derek's illusion of control brick by brick. The store felt different the next morning. There was an edge in the air, like the crackle of a storm before it broke. Employees whispered in corners. Carl barked orders louder than usual, and Amanda stood at her register with her chin a little higher than before. Her bruises hadn't vanished, her cast still weighed down her arm, but something in her eyes had shifted. There was fear, yes, but also a spark of resolve. Tony watched her from the customer service desk where he pretended to wait in line. His disguise was still on, denim jacket, baseball hat, but Amanda knew now. She knew who he was, and more importantly, she had said the words, "Help me." That was all Tony needed. He checked his watch. Right on time. At precisely 10 a.m., two sharply dressed individuals walked through the store doors, Laura Briggs, his lawyer, and Daniel Keene, his head of security. Neither of them wore name tags. Neither of them belonged to Wayne Mart's staff. And yet, as they strode across the floor with quiet authority, heads turned. Carl intercepted them near the registers, his face smug. "This is a private establishment. Can I help you?" Laura didn't even glance at him. She walked straight toward Amanda's register, Tony following behind. Carl sputtered. "Hey, I'm the manager here. You can't just..." That's when Tony spoke, his voice cutting through the entire store. "Yes, Carl. I can." Carl froze, turning toward him. His eyes widened as Tony removed his hat, straightened his jacket, and let the mask fall away. The murmurs started instantly. Employees whispered, customers craned their necks, and Carl's smugness melted into confusion. "Mr. Wayne," he stammered. "Tony Wayne? CEO?" Tony's voice carried the weight of command. "That's right. And I've been undercover in this store for weeks. I've seen everything, how you treat employees, how you belittle and harass them, how you failed the very people who keep this business alive." Carl's face flushed crimson. I didn't know." "That's the problem," Tony interrupted coldly. "You didn't care." The employees gasped, some even smiling faintly, relief in their eyes. But Amanda stood frozen, trembling, her hand tightening around the edge of her register. Then, before the moment could settle, the automatic doors slid open again. Derek walked in. He was dressed in a leather jacket, his expression casual, but his eyes locked instantly on Amanda. Then they flicked to Tony, who now stood bare of disguise. The smile that curved Derek's lips was venomous. Well, he drawled, striding forward. The big man himself. No wonder she's been acting different. Guess she found herself a knight in shining armor. Amanda paled, her entire body stiffening. Derek stopped in front of her register and leaned across the counter, his voice sharp. Tell me, Amanda. Did you think running to him would save you? Did you really think money makes you untouchable? Tony stepped forward, placing himself between Derek and Amanda. His voice was low but dangerous. She doesn't belong to you. Derek laughed, loud and cruel. Belong? That's where you're wrong, old man. She is mine. Has been for years. You think a few legal papers and your bodyguards can change that? You don't know her like I do. You don't know what she's done. She'll always come back to me. Amanda's lips trembled. That's not true. Derek turned on her, his eyes flashing. Shut up. But Amanda didn't. For the first time, her voice rose, shaky but firm. It isn't true. I don't belong to you. Not anymore. Gasps rippled through the staff gathered nearby. Amanda's chest heaved, tears spilling down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. She didn't shrink back. Derek sneered, taking a step toward her, but Tony moved quicker. He blocked Derek's path, his frame solid as steel. You lay a hand on her, Tony said, his voice cutting like a blade, and you'll answer to me, and the law. Derek smirked, leaning in close enough that Tony could smell the alcohol on his breath. The law doesn't scare me. That's fine, Tony replied calmly. Because I do. At his signal, Daniel Keene stepped forward, flashing a badge, private security, fully licensed, fully armed. Laura Briggs followed with a folder thick with papers. Derek Cole, Laura's voice rang out, you've been served with a restraining order effective immediately. Any contact with Amanda Wrights or her children will result in arrest. Additionally, we've reopened 3 prior cases of assault linked to your name. You're officially under investigation. The color drained from Derek's face. The store had gone silent. Customers stood frozen with carts half filled. Employees held their breath. Amanda's tears streamed freely now, but her eyes were fixed on Derek, watching him weaken, watching the control he'd wielded like a weapon finally slip. You think a piece of paper stops me? Derek spat, though his voice cracked slightly now. You think she's safe just because you... Before he could finish, 2 uniformed police officers entered the store. Tony had called them hours earlier, time to arrive just as the papers were served. Derek Cole, one officer called. You're coming with us. Derek's bravado shattered. He turned back to Amanda, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over. You hear me? You'll never be free of me. Amanda flinched, but Tony stepped between them again, his voice like thunder. Yes, she will. Because she's not alone anymore. And you'll never touch her or her children again. The officers seized Derek's arms, cuffing him as he thrashed. His curses echoed through the aisles, but with each step they dragged him toward the doors, his power drained away. When the doors finally closed behind him, silence fell. And then, applause. It started with one cashier near the bakery, then another by the deli, until the entire staff was clapping, cheering, tears streaming down their faces. Customers joined in, nodding at Amanda, shouting encouragement. Amanda, trembling, sank into her chair, covering her mouth with her good hand. She looked at Tony, disbelief and relief warring in her eyes. You did it, she whispered. Tony crouched beside her, his voice gentle now. No, Amanda. You did. You stood up to him. You found your voice. I just made sure the world heard it. She sobbed then, collapsing forward into his chest. Tony held her carefully, mindful of her injuries, but steady and unyielding. The battle wasn't over. Healing would take time. Legal fights would continue. But for the first time in years, Amanda Wrights wasn't afraid to breathe. And for the first time in his life, Tony Wayne felt like all his billions had finally been used for something that truly mattered. That night, outside the store, Amanda sat on the curb with Tony. The police had taken Derek away, the papers had been signed, and the employees had dispersed. Amanda's children were safe at a friend's house under security escort. For the first time in years, she didn't dread going home. She turned to Tony, her voice trembling. What if he comes back? Tony shook his head. He won't. Not without consequences so heavy, He'll wish he never laid eyes on you. You and your children are protected now." Amanda's tears glistened under the streetlights. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Tony said softly. "Just live. Just give your kids the life they deserve. That's thanks enough." She leaned her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes. For the first time in years, she let herself rest. And Tony, looking up at the night sky, whispered a vow only he could hear. "Never again. No one under my watch will ever suffer in silence again." The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. Amanda sat on the bench outside the family division courtroom, her cast resting across her lap. Beside her, Tony stood in a tailored navy suit, exuding quiet strength. Laura Briggs shuffled papers on the table across from them, her lawyer's eyes sharp and focused. Amanda's children were down the hall in a supervised playroom. She could hear faint laughter echoing, and it brought a tear to her eye. Laughter had been missing from her home for so long that it felt almost foreign. The judge entered, stern but fair. The proceedings began swiftly, restraining orders finalized, temporary custody solidified, Derek's bail denied thanks to his violent history. The evidence Laura presented was airtight. Amanda didn't have to say much. Tony's resources had already done the heavy lifting. But when the judge looked at her and asked, "Ms. Wrights, do you feel safe proceeding with full custody?" Amanda swallowed hard. She glanced at Tony. His steady nod gave her strength. "Yes, Your Honor," she said firmly. Her voice shook, but her words rang clear. "I feel safe. For the first time in years, I feel safe." The gavel came down. Custody granted. Derek's visitation rights suspended. Amanda exhaled, a sound that was almost a sob of relief. Her children were hers, truly hers, without the shadow of violence looming over them. Outside the courthouse, Amanda leaned against the pillar steps, sunlight washing her face. She closed her eyes, feeling warmth instead of dread. Tony walked beside her. "How do you feel?" Amanda let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Like I've been carrying 100 pounds on my back for years, and it finally fell off. I don't know what to do with the lightness." Tony smiled softly. "Learn to live in it." She looked at him, emotion flooding her gaze. "You gave me my life back." "No," Tony said, shaking his head. "You took it back. All I did was clear the path." Amanda's lips trembled. She wanted to argue, to insist he'd been the reason, but deep down she understood. She had chosen. She had found the courage to say yes when he asked if she wanted help. And now, the world looked different. The weeks that followed were filled with healing. Tony ensured Amanda had a safe apartment, away from Derek's reach, fully secured with 24/7 monitoring. He offered her a new job, one with better pay, flexible hours, and health benefits, but Amanda hesitated at first. "I don't want charity," she said quietly when he presented the offer. "It's not charity," Tony replied. "It's opportunity. You deserve to work in a place where you're respected, where you're seen. You've given years to this company. Let me give something back." Slowly, she accepted. At her new role, Amanda blossomed. Her co-workers were kind, her hours reasonable, and for the first time, she could leave work at work. Her children noticed too. Their mother laughed again, cooked dinner without flinching at shadows, even read them bedtime stories without her voice catching. The bruises faded. The cast eventually came off. And though the scars, emotional and physical, remained, Amanda began to see them not as marks of weakness, but of survival. Tony, meanwhile, found himself changed as well. When he first went undercover, he'd expected to find logistical failures, maybe employee theft, maybe inefficiency. He'd braced for corporate issues he could fix with policies and numbers. Instead, he had found Amanda. And through her he discovered something money could never measure: the human cost of silence, the resilience of those society often overlooked, the power of stepping into someone else's pain instead of looking away. He reorganized Wainmart from the ground up. Employee wellness programs were implemented. Anonymous hotlines for workplace abuse and harassment were launched. Training for managers became mandatory, with compassion ranked higher than quotas. The employees noticed. For the first time, they felt their CEO wasn't a distant name on a building but a man who had walked their aisles, stocked their shelves, and stood at their registers. Word spread. Customers returned, praising the company's changes. Media outlets picked up the story, an undercover CEO who had not only transformed his stores but had also stepped in to save an abused employee. But through all the headlines, all the accolades, Tony's focus stayed on Amanda and her children. One evening, months later, Amanda invited him to dinner at her new apartment. It wasn't grand, a modest two-bedroom sparsely furnished, but it was hers. Her children were ecstatic to see him. They tugged at his sleeves, showing him school drawings, chattering about games. Amanda watched from the kitchen doorway, her eyes soft, her heart swelling. After dinner, when the kids were tucked into bed, Amanda joined Tony on the small balcony. The night was quiet, stars faint against the city lights. She turned to him, voice hesitant. "Why me, Tony? Out of all the employees you met, out of all the things you could have focused on, you chose me. Why?" Tony met her gaze, his expression solemn. "Because you were hurting. And because I saw strength in you when you couldn't see it yourself. You reminded me that all the success in the world means nothing if we can't use it to lift someone else up." Amanda blinked back tears. Her hand rested on the railing, inches from his. Slowly, deliberately, Tony laid his hand over hers. "I don't know what the future holds," he said softly. "But I do know this, I'll be here. As long as you'll have me." Amanda's lips curved in a small, trembling smile. "Then maybe the future doesn't have to be so scary." For the first time in years, she believed it. Months later, Amanda stood outside Walmart's flagship store, not as a cashier, but as a guest speaker at the company's annual employee conference. Her heart pounded as she faced hundreds of employees seated before her. Tony sat in the front row, watching with quiet pride. Amanda cleared her throat. "A year ago, I thought my story would end in silence. I thought no one saw me, no one cared, and no one could help. But then, someone did. And he reminded me that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about finding the courage to rebuild when you do." The audience erupted in applause. Amanda's eyes sought Tony's, and he gave her the smallest of nods. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a voice for others who still lived in the shadows. And that was the greatest victory of all. Weeks later, on a quiet beach Tony often escaped to, Amanda walked barefoot with her children. They ran ahead, laughter echoing against the waves. Amanda tilted her face toward the sun, inhaling salt air, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Tony walked beside her, hands in his pockets, watching the children play. Amanda glanced at him, her heart steady. She didn't know if their paths would lead to romance, to partnership, or simply to lifelong friendship. But she knew one thing, she was no longer alone. And for the first time in years, the future wasn't something to fear, it was something to welcome. As the waves crashed, Amanda whispered a final vow to herself. "I am free. I am enough. And my story isn't over, it's just beginning." And somewhere deep in his soul, Tony echoed the same promise. Amanda's story shows us that no matter how dark things feel, hope and healing are always possible when someone chooses courage. If you were her, what would be the first thing you'd do after finally being free? Share your answer in the comments. You never know who your words might inspire.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.